Hello, I'm Richard Kessler, Executive Dean for the College of Performing Arts and Dean of the Mannes School of Music at the New School. Welcome to In Our Time, Conversations with Robert Hurwitz. On behalf of UCLA and the New School, I am thrilled to welcome you to this program today. I would also like to offer special thanks to Nonesuch Records and to welcome all of our friends and colleagues at Columbia University. Now, please join me in welcoming my friend, our friend, Robert Hurwitz.
Thanks for being here today. I am Bob Hurwitz, and I want to start by reading something that the great Brazilian musician Gilberto Gil once said. He said, "Unlike me, Caetano Veloso could have been a great painter, writer, playwright, or filmmaker, whatever he chose to be. He sees music as a fragment within a whole, which makes him as an artist in the broadest sense of the word, and gives his songs a conceptual vision that is much wider than anybody else's." I began working with Caetano in 1986. Nonesuch, the company I've worked with for over 30 years of my life, has released 16 albums of his during that time. The release of his first record for Nonesuch was actually one of the defining moments in the company's history. When I first came to the label, Nonesuch was known as a classical company. By recording Caetano, a question was posed about the hierarchy of the music world. Could an artist who wrote and sang popular songs have the same artistic currency as a classical musician or a composer? Could we get past the idea of making judgments based on genre? It was a transformative moment that changed the course of Nonesuch for the next 30 years. Caetano's songs are commentaries on both the Brazilian experience and the culture of our time. Even his English record, sung exquisitely in a language that he learned during his forced exile from Brazil, is as much a Brazilian record as anything else. The songs unfold as observations about culture in America and what it meant to a Brazilian to absorb that culture. Caetano is also the author of Tropical Truth, a brilliant memoir that was published 20 years ago in America. In today's New York Times, David Burns cited Tropical Truth as his favorite memoir by a musician and said, "I love that sense of music, not being an isolated thing, but existing among everything else that goes on." If Caetano had never sung a word, never sung a note of music, or never written a song, he would still be one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. I'm grateful to be having this conversation with Caetano this evening. And welcome, Caetano. And great to see you. And maybe you could tell us something about your life in Rio in these last 7 months.
It's been funny. It's been weird to be at home all the time, but not bad. And I was, in fact, amazed by the words that I read that had been said by Gilberto Gil about me. I had forgotten about it, or perhaps I never heard them. It was an impact. It had an impact on me because what I felt was Gil is saying that he likes me so much that it's not that important for him that he's a real musician while I'm not. You know, that's what I felt, and that's what I thought. Really, I was a little moved, in fact, and I'm still am, even by the words you said, Bob, and what David Burns said was a surprise to me, because Tropical Truth is something that we almost never talked about. I love talking to David Byrne. I love to listen to him and to have conversations with him. It's a funny thing because he seems to be a person who would be difficult to talk with. It's just the contrary, you know, it's the opposite. It's always so fluent to be with him in conversation, you know, but we never talked, except for once when I forced the subject of Tropical Truth, my memoir, that I said, I never heard you guys say anything about that book. I think I remember I told something like that to you too, Bob.
Yeah.
And you said, no, I read it and I felt interested in it and everything. But then David Byrne said to me that oh no, I liked it. Because David is, you know, David is in a different, I don't know, in a different instance, you know, in
Well,
existence.
One of the
I'm a little. Okay, go on.
Please. Well, I was going to say one thing. I was going to say one thing about Tropical Truth is one of the most moving chapters was a chapter about your imprisonment in 1969 in Brazil, when you and Gil were arrested. And for the people in this audience right now, they may not know this part of your history, that that all of a sudden in the middle of the night you were in Sao Paulo and just picked up by the police and thrown into a cell during the time of the military dictatorship in Brazil. And very recently, a film was made and was shown at the Venice Film Festival that was based on that experience. And I would like to have those in the audience see about a 3-minute clip from that film, which I think says a great deal about the profound impact of that moment was on your life.
Eu disse, a gente não foi torturado. No entanto, teve um dia em que eu fui chamado, veio um tenente para... E tinha um soldadinho desse só, porque tinha um soldado que falava com a gente, ali mais do que... Porque aqui, essas portas eram só grades, de cima a baixo. Então, a gente podia ver as pessoas que passavam no corredor, as pessoas vinham, encostavam, olhavam, falavam. E então um soldadinho veio e ficou me olhando assim com uma cara triste, me olhando, um soldadinho novinho assim, ficou me olhando e eu fiquei depois eu vi ele ficou com o olho cheio d'água assim, e eu fiquei meio, daí a pouco eu olhei para ele com uma cara de quem faz uma pergunta, ele fez assim como quem diz não, abaixou a cabeça, uma coisa, e aí vieram 2 oficiais e um sargento e me chamaram para sair. E vestir a roupa e sair. Trouxeram a roupa, não sei. Isso aí eu pensei, será o interrogatório? E todo mundo ficou me olhando assim, e esse soldadinho com uma cara assustada. Aí os caras me levaram. Mas era assim, porque são como pequenas cidades, né? Esses quartéis da Vila. A Vila Militar tem uma rua com calçamento de paralelepípedo. E tinha umas edificações aqui pequenas, com umas pequenas casas. E eles mandaram, ande para frente, eles com as armas. Ande em frente e não olhe para trás. Aí eu fiquei com medo e fui andando. E aí pensei que eles iam atirar, entendeu? Pensei mesmo, porque não tinha aquela rua vazia, aquele negócio, essas coisas aqui assim, umas casinhas. E eu andando, fechada, eu andando assim, e os caras atrás com as armas. Aí, num determinado momento, pare! Eu aí parei, fiquei meio gelado. pensando que ia morrer, porque era uma coisa tão esquisita, o soldadinho estava chorando. Aí eles mandaram parar e disse, vira à direita. Eu virei, aí mandaram eu subir, entrar numa porta, era um barbeiro. Eu tinha um cabelo grande, todo cacheado assim, grandão. E eles cortaram meu cabelo. Eu fiquei feliz porque não ia morrer. E eu não podia nem demonstrar a minha felicidade adorando aquele barbeiro, cortando meu cabelo. Aí fiquei com o cabelo, eles cortaram o cabelo como se fosse um soldado, né? Eu tinha aquele cabelo bem grandão assim, eles cortaram, rasparam aqui assim, deixaram baixinho em cima. Aí depois me levaram de volta. E eu cheguei, aí os meninos tudo, puxa, cortaram o seu cabelo, não sei o quê, porque aquilo era uma coisa simbólica de liberdade, né? Mas eu estava feliz porque não me mataram.
The entire film is a remarkable story. Hopefully it's going to be shown in America soon. But Caetano, could you talk a little bit about how the film came to be?
The thing is, I had written Tropical Truth in the 90s. It was released in Brazil in 1997. And I liked the book. I wrote it like, I was touring, and after the shows, I would go to the hotel and I'll write parts of it. And then I completed it. And that part that tells the story of our imprisonment is the one that I liked the most, because the rest of the book is more like, a little bit essayistic, essayistic, as if it were a series of meditations and interpretations of the cultural situation and political situation in Brazil in my personal formation as a person, my personal formation. But that part that's called Narcissus of Duty, that tells the imprisonment, was and it is my favorite because it's a narrative, and it has the whole theoretical importance of the rest of the book without being nothing else than a narrative. So as a literary piece, I have always preferred that chapter. And then I've been trying with the editors in Brazil to release it as a book, as a separate book, autonomous book. And they finally, 2 or 3 years ago, agreed, and they were going to do it. But then in Brazil grew this phenomenon of right-wing populism, and they elected Bolsonaro as our president. And I was planning to release this book separate with the story of the imprisonment during the dictatorship, because Bolsonaro is always saying compliments about the most hard torturers and all the ugly aspects of the military dictatorship. He's saying he represents an approval of everything that happened between 1964 1978 75 and 85, more than 20 years it lasted. And so Paulinha, who is my wife and also my manager, said we should make a film out of it to go out with the book. to be released with the book. And so we started doing it. But then in the middle of this process, Bolsonaro was elected. And it became a stronger, stranger thing in the Brazilian panorama, you know. So that's the story of the thing. It was released. It was chosen by Venice Festival as exactly when those bad things were happening in Brazil. It's a funny rhythm.
Caetano, I'd like just to ask you something that I thought about after watching the film, which I think is relevant to what's going on today, which was 1969, you were arrested, you've had this terrorizing experience, which all comes out in the film. You were then expelled from the country or deported from the country or whatever word, and went to England, where you lived and where you learned to speak such beautiful English. And the question is, as an artist, prior to what happened and after what happened, how did your music change? How did it impact the way you wrote songs or what you did in your performances? Just as we're looking at this moment today, how I think for artists, this moment is going to have an impact for musicians on what they create moving forward. But as far as your own personal history, after having gone through this terrible moment, what was the impact on your art and your music?
In fact, this takes me back to what Gilberto Gil said, because I was planning to get detached from the popular music world. I wanted to direct films, to write and direct films, and of course I'd use music written by myself in those movies, whatever. But I was planning more. Because I didn't believe in my own musical abilities, you know, skills, my musical skills. If I compare myself to Gilberto Gil or Milton Nascimento or Djavan or Egberto Gismonti, or, you know, I have a lot of colleagues who are incredible musicians, and I have never thought myself as one of those. I'm proud of being a colleague of theirs, but I'll tell you, I was planning to change my life. But music, popular music, is a very strong thing in Brazil, you know. And for you to write a song and play it on a guitar, you don't need anybody to produce it. You don't have to be, you know, trying to get money from rich people to put on it, you know, as you have with films. So in fact, I got weaker as a person, because we were imprisoned in São Paulo. We were arrested in São Paulo, but imprisoned in Rio. The very first thing was too big, because I was in my apartment in the early morning, and they took us, me and Gil, to Rio, 5 hours in a police car, you know, without anybody explaining why. And then why I lived in São Paulo, why am I being taken to Rio, you know? They never explained until now. And we stayed for more than 1 month without anybody asking any questions to us or explaining anything, saying why we were being imprisoned, or telling my wife where I was, or my parents or my relatives. Those people just knew that I had disappeared, you know. because the guys came. I was with my wife, my then wife, there in São Paulo, and they came, and he said, "The military want to ask us a few questions. Ask you a few questions." It was going to be an interrogation. So I thought it was in São Paulo, something 1 hour, 2 hours. I'll go, come back home, but no. So my wife took her car and she followed us, but they took us to Rio, and then in Rio, no interrogation, no explanation, nothing, you know. So that makes you kind of crazy, you know. After that, they took us to Bahia, and then we stayed in prison for about 2 months in Rio, and the interrogations only started a month after we had been arrested. And after the interrogations, I was kind of, I had proved I was innocent of the ridiculous accusations they had about me, against me. And I was taken to Bahia, me and Gil, and then we had to stay in Bahia, the city of Salvador, the capital of the state. And we could not leave town, and we had to report to a colonel every day, every single day, and write our name and sign on a copybook, whatever. And after that, we were invited, after 4 months of that, we were invited to leave Brazil. So we went to Portugal, then France, and finally England, where we stayed for 2.5 years. So all this amount of thing had to weaken me, you know? So I got at least attached to songs.
Yeah, no. In fact, you just said something a few days ago, and I'm trying to find this quote from The Guardian, where you said, and yes, you said, our forests, our songs, our plays, our films are being threatened by the government and are in process of being destroyed. But as one of the members of the group that produces popular music, I can assure you that we are here. Brazil is here. And which leads to the climate for artists in Brazil right now during the Bolsonaro regime. Does it have a parallel to what you remembered from the late 60s and early 70s in terms of what it is living under this very, very difficult government in your country?
Well, a parallel is inevitable, but the situation is pretty different.
Yeah.
Because back then we had a coup d'etat, a military coup d'etat, and in 1964, I have to say that Brazil was pioneering a wave that took South America, Latin America during the Cold War in that period. And after Brazil, but next decade, Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay went under military dictatorships and coup d'etats and everything. And but that was, it was a coup d'etat, and 4 years later, that was in 64 that the coup d'etat came. And in 68, they hardened their methods, you know, with what they called an institutional act number 5 that gave right for the police to invade houses without mandates. You know, you couldn't have habeas corpus. You know, it was really a terrible thing. And now, what we have is a democratically elected president, you know, who was a military. He was a captain. In fact, he was expelled from the army, but he has been as a deputy for decades. He has been a congressman, and he always worked with the ideas of the military having more facilities and more privileges. And so he grew among some military areas and the military police. But he was considered a funny guy because he was a little, he was not an important politician. But then he became president, and his campaign was based on, accusing all the governments that preceded his, mostly Lula, but also Fernando Henrique Cardoso, because Fernando Henrique Cardoso was kind of center left, but he was with Lula an opposer of the military dictatorship. He would oppose it, and then Lula, who was more to the left. Lula has never been a socialist or a communist, but he was a workers' leader, and he was backed by the left-wing intellectuals, and in the end he became a very popular figure because he made things that helped poor people in Brazil to reorganize their lives. It was really impressive. So there was this enormous reaction against these steps, and this involves, I must tell you, this involves international forces and plans and desires also, and the societies are conservative, otherwise they wouldn't be a society. They wouldn't be societies. They have to conserve whatever they have to be put together. And this conservative aspect was used, and a fear of corruption, because Lula government had case of corruption, and that was amplified by the press, and that helped the election of this new president. So now that he's a president for more than a year, what's happening is basically the Brazil Cinematheque, which is an institution, it's been abandoned. It's like, all things related to culture are despised, and the education ministry has been occupied by, now it's the fourth one, and they are all like anti-education, but openly. As if they thought education is a subversive, dangerous thing. That's the way they act, that's the way they speak. And so, at all things, we don't have songs forbidden or prohibited as they were during the military dictatorship. We are under so-called democratic government, and it is because the Congress is working, so is the Supreme Court, and things are negotiated. But the thing is, Bolsonaro appeared saying that I have nothing to do with negotiating with deputies or congressmen or senators, but now he's doing that exactly with the most corrupt areas of the Congress, you know, to hold him in the presidency,
Right.
to avoid impeachment.
Right.
So we have a corrosion of our cultural and political life. It's different from having laws that forbid or prohibit, you know, but you always remember that period.
Right. Caetano, I want to actually talk a little bit about the relationships about Brazil, you know, because there are so many parallels at this moment between American and Brazilian life. The pandemic, the threat of totalitarianism, environmental disasters like the burning of the rainforest in Brazil, and the fires and hurricanes in America. And like America, Brazil is a country that had a history of slavery, not abolished until I think 1888, and is also a multiracial society. So, you know, I think I joked to you the other day that in America, we have to worry about Trump. And in Brazil, you have to worry about Bolsonaro, and you also have to worry about Trump. That the impact of America has on the life in Brazil, because so many people like Bolsonaro have taken their cue from Trump in terms of their approach to anything, even things like the pandemic. But I want to give a quote that you wrote. For those who don't know, Caetano is often a person who media in America and England and other places asked to weigh in about what is going on in Brazil, and has written editorials in the New York Times. And right before the election of Bolsonaro, you said, many people here say they are planning to live abroad if Bolsonaro wins. I have never wanted to live in any country other than Brazil, and I don't want to do that now. I was forced into exile once. It won't happen again. I want my music, my presence, to be a permanent resistance to whatever anti-democratic features may come of a probable Bolsonaro government. This was right before the election happened. Maybe it would, I think, be interesting for all to hear you talk a little bit about why Brazil is so important to your identity as both an artist and as a human being.
I think because I'm a narcissistic personality, because I was born here, I speak Portuguese, and that makes us even different from the rest of Latin America, who speak Spanish mostly. And Brazil is the only country that speaks Portuguese. And we have a funny history, because the King of Portugal came to Brazil when Napoleon was taking Europe, and he left. They say he fled, you know, to Brazil, you know, running away from Napoleon. But the fact is that Napoleon wrote before he died about the Portuguese king. Dom João VI was the only one who, how can I translate it? I know it in Portuguese. Was the only one who me enganou, who could mislead me, you know, like, and the thing is that the king came to Brazil, lived here for many years, and transformed Rio de Janeiro in the center of the Portuguese Empire, and left his son, when he went back many years, to be the emperor of Brazil. And then came the second emperor, and it's a formation totally different from the rest of the other American countries. And Portugal must have been something important in the 1500s, you know, late 1400s, because the Pope divided all the lands that could be found in the Americas between Portugal and Spain, with a line dividing. So Portugal must have been an important country somehow, but it became a very unimportant country. I remember when I was younger that some Europeans used the expression "the pigs" to describe Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. The pigs. Now people talk about BRICS. They don't say underdeveloped anymore. They say emergent. Things changed a little bit, but the configuration is basically the same. So I'm Brazilian. I don't want to leave it, and I want to be here and to resist with my presence against this atmosphere that came with Bolsonaro. And yes, from here we have to bear both Bolsonaro and Trump, because the United States are, the central power of the world, at least nowadays, if we count China. The United States is the center of our world. We are the periphery. We are peripheral.
Yeah.
And,
you recently said somewhere that you are scandalously optimistic about what is being faced in Brazil. What did you mean by scandalously optimistic? A tongue twister.
Because I think Brazil must save the world. Brazil's mission is to save the world, not less. But it's scandalous and too optimistic, because Brazil is terrible. Like real life in Brazil, daily life in Brazil is terrible. This woman in Rio, a young woman who was a representative in the municipal power. She was a black, beautiful, elegant, intelligent woman, was shot dead, by militias, by people who are including connected with the president and his family, And until now, the crime has not been clarified. And militias in Rio mostly are taking power of areas of the city, and it's not a country where you could have reasons to be optimistic. So it's a scandalous, maybe mystical optimism that I carry with me since I was very young, and it only grew with the difficulties. Maybe it's not a compensation. It's not that alienated.
Yeah.
There is something that's I just touched a little bit of our originality. many people in Brazil react against that. They're right, but I still look at Brazil as an original situation, a historical, strange thing. And I think that we are an opportunity, a chance of really changing the world. We are enormous territorially, you know, and we have been a failure for too long, but a eternal promise, you know, like, for example, Stefan Zweig, the great writer, wrote a book called Brazil, Country of the Future, you know, and I grew up with that thing. And in my house, my father and I'm from Bahia, it's mostly Black. We are highly racially mixed. And this is very important. I welcome the American influence of more precise ideas about race, but we cannot copy the black and white precision of the United States, because miscegenation here has been too dense, too strong. I am brown, you know. My father was a mulatto, and in my city, in Bahia, my hometown, most people were either black or a little less black. Some almost could be called white, you know. I am among those who could be called white, and I'm brown. You know, if you go to São Paulo, to the south, you'll find more white people, because even a plan of whitening the population was put in evidence during the end of the 18th century, 19th century, I mean 19th century, and 1800s, and the 20th century, of importing immigrants from Europe to whiten our population. And they were welcome, and they mean a lot to, mostly to the south of Brazil, mostly São Paulo and part of the south. And they enriched our population, and it's wonderful to have them. But the whitening really never worked. Brazil is mostly brown and very much black. It's true, speaking Portuguese, being enormous territorially in the southern hemisphere, you know, and highly racially mixed, we have an opportunity to save the world, you know.
Yeah.
Although our life is mostly horrible, but it's not only horrible, you know. I was born in the same country as João Gilberto, and I'm very happy that, you know, Dirty Projectors, a young band, a guy called David Longstreth, is an American, very talented musician. His new thing is called Super João. He's indie rock. He's indie rock, very musical.
Yeah.
And so I was born in the same country as João Gilberto, as Antônio Carlos Jobim, as, you know, Milton Nascimento, as Jorge Ben, as Glauber Rocha. There are there are things in Brazil that, make you think that all these horrible things could be over, over, we should overcome them. And if we do, we'll save the world.
We have a few minutes left, Caetano, and I first of all want to thank you for joining me today. And if you could just, because we only have about 5 minutes left, briefly, music you're writing right now, is it affected by being in your house for 7 months, or seeing what's on the news, or is it going in a different direction? What can we expect?
Yes, they've changed. But I was composing songs just before that pandemic appeared. Yeah. And back then I was writing lots of songs, which was strange to me because I was thinking, I'm quite old. I've written too many songs. I should not write new songs anymore, or almost nothing. But then in Bahia during the summer, and before that a little bit, I started composing lots of songs. I said, okay, I can't control it. So I wrote many songs. I was going to make a record. But then came the pandemic, and it was hard to go on composing the same way. But I still compose new songs that I add to those ones. And maybe I'll make a record when it's possible. It's beginning to be.
Right.
So
the other thing I was thinking, as you mentioned, João Gilberto and Gil and Milton Nascimento and all these great Brazilian, it's by a chance of fate that you were born in Brazil, because the culture, the musical culture of Brazil was something that was so sympathetic to what your own interests are as a composer, as a singer, as a songwriter, as an artist. Having known your music for so many years, I could only speak in gratitude in terms of what it's meant to me and so many people. But it's truly Brazilian. Music only could have come from Brazil. It's not a copy of any other style. All artists hear all things and take them inside them, but it's really been a kind of blessing to have been around you for so many years. I just to put a close to this, one of the scenes in the movie, when you were all of a sudden one day, someone gave you a copy, I don't remember, it was Life magazine or Look magazine, and you saw a picture taken from space of the Earth. And I just would like you to describe that, and we're going to end just after you're finished with 2 more small film clips that are going to relate to all the things we've talked about today. So tell us about when you received this magazine, which I think was the first written material that you had seen for quite a long time.
Well, it was a Brazilian magazine, in fact, called Manchete. The magazine is called Manchete. And there was my wife then. She took to the cell where I was, the magazine, and I saw it. They were the first photographs taken from the outer space of the planet. And I was impacted. But then 10 years later, I wrote a song about that.
Yeah. Well, we're going to listen to a little of that. And once again, I thank you so much for being with me today, and hope everyone in your family is safe and well during this very, very tortuous period of our lives. Thank you.
I thank you. It's been wonderful to talk to you. It has always been, all these years, and tonight, great.
Thank you, Caetano.
Thank you, Bob.
quando eu me encontrava preso na cela de uma cadeia, foi que eu vi pela primeira vez as tais fotografias em que apareces inteira, porém lá não estavas nua, e sim coberta de nuvens, terra, terra, por mais distante, o errante navegante, quem jamais te esquecer. Me lembro muito de uma frase que o Rogério me disse, Rogério Duarte, me disse logo quando eu fui solto. O Rogério um dia me disse: quando a gente é preso para sempre. Ele já tinha sido preso, né? E eu às vezes sinto isso.